Welcome to Trailer Geeks and Teaser Gods. I am your host, Corey Nathan, and this is where we talk about the history of the entertainment advertising industry, the making of the greatest trailers, posters, and now digital work that the world loves, the Hall of Famers of this industry. So the brilliant, creative, wonderful people who make the greatest coming attractions and movie posters of all time, what's happening in the industry, and even what's happening in our culture. And I am super grateful I get to hang out with such interesting, smart individuals and be a part of these conversations. Today, we are joined, I've been wanting to do this, I can't tell you how long. I am so grateful to be joined by Dwight Caines. Dwight is the president of domestic marketing for Universal Pictures, where he oversees media, digital marketing, multicultural marketing, data analytics, and publicity. Prior to uni, Dwight served as president of marketing at Sony. Over the course of his career, he's worked on hundreds of movies, including the James Bond and Spider-Man franchises, the Super Mario Brothers movie, Oppenheimer, so many more. Dwight is also co-chair of the Universal Pictures Inclusion Council, which strives to enhance a commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion among the workforce and its creative endeavors. Dwight also gives back to his alma mater, Syracuse's Newhouse School of Communications, as a mentor and adjunct professor in their LA program, where he teaches film marketing. He's also been an active member at the Academy's Marketing and Public Relations branch since 2010, and was a member of the Academy Task Force, whose goal was to increase diverse representation of its membership, among other charitable endeavors, which we'll get to. But you're also a dad, from what I hear. How's that going?
Oh, man. You make it sound like, they're children, but they're men now. I have two sons. They're 24 and just about to turn 21. And it's been a journey. I think one of the things that, as I look back on what I'll say is a life well lived, I have some regrets about not spending enough time on those little moments I'll never get back, you know? And so now I think one of the things my wife and I try to do is really be present, and kind of drop anything and everything if our guys need something, and that's really fulfilling for me. Brief tangent. Somebody said to me, somebody that I mentor said to me that because I've been in this business for a long time, they expected I'd have a hard time walking away because we become our jobs. And my answer was I could walk away at any time. The reason why I stay is as a provider, I've got to make sure that I'm earning and providing for, my family. I've got aging parents on the East Coast. I've got, as I mentioned, two sons, one who lives in Brooklyn, one who's out here. So I love what I do. And it also provides the means to provide for them.
Yeah. It's funny. My oldest kid is about to be 23 in March. So your younger son is about to be 21. When's his birthday?
April 2nd.
Okay. Yeah. So my youngest is going to be 19 on February 19th. And then the oldest is going to be 23 in March 312. She's, they're Chicago. That's how I remember it. The 312. And then the middle kid is 20, but the two boys, 20 and almost 19. It's interesting because this isn't like being a dad to infants and toddlers or even teenagers necessarily. But I'm grateful. Our oldest kid is up in Humboldt, Savannah. The boys are with me. And these last 6 to 9 months has been interesting because my wife, their mom, is entering a new chapter in her life. She got a job with United Airlines.
Oh, wow.
So she's been away. We've been apart for the first time in 30 years. But that's allowed me with the boys at this stage of their development it's a different kind of relationship, obviously. The one thing that I've been noticing is stuff happens in life, right?
Right.
But I'm grateful that I'm with them to help them through manageable crises. You know what I mean?
I do. And it's interesting because some people try to be friends with their kids as they get older. We're not friends with our kids, but they are grown-ups. And the way we interact with them is very different than when they were kids. So now when they react to me as their dad, they also have a host of life experiences where I kind of have to respect those opinions, right? In a way,
that
maybe I didn't when they were 5 and 8.
Right. Now, I've seen you post. You share publicly about, what you're working through individually, personally, as well as, you have a public presence. And one post in particular, you were talking about your sons. It was in the aftermath of when George Floyd was murdered. How have you how have you found a compass, man? Like in such troubled times, how do you find a compass to manage through times like these?
Listen, I think for everyone, that was a moment where there were a bunch of things that had been going on that just bubbled to the surface. It wasn't like the civil unrest or racial tension, or even the stresses on our democracy. It wasn't like that stuff was new. It just came to light, and maybe accelerated and exacerbated by the fact that we were all at home, thinking and agitating about this stuff. And it was a moment where I thought about, this was as close to what it must have felt like for people to be going to war, right? Literally watching, and again, the fragility of democracy, I guess is maybe that's a lofty way to put it, but we're in a real crisis. And so the posts that I make tend to be either about work or personal, but they're all still pretty curated, right? I mean, like anybody, I'm not going to put things out there that expose me to anything that that might create jeopardy for myself or my family. And so the compass is, how do I show up authentically so that when you see a post or an email or something from me, it's the same person that you meet when you meet me, right? That's the biggest thing. Right? Many times you friend somebody on social and then you run into them and it's like you don't really know them, because that yes, I'll connect is transactional. It's not real. And so for me, I try to be the guy you meet on the pages of Instagram is the guy you'll meet in the room doing the podcast, right? And authenticity is something that, I can say that now after about 27 years in the business. I don't think that was how I approached the business when I first got into it.
Oh, that's interesting. Is that a positive evolution, you think?
Absolutely, yeah. I think, look, I've always felt a little bit, even to this day, of a little bit of an outsider status in this industry, right? I started my career
in banking.
Well, yeah. Look, I left college wanting to write.
Yeah.
My writing partner, my best friend growing up, and I were trying to write spec scripts, and we saw the spec market was hot back then. We graduated in the late 80s, and so after a few years of freelancing and shipping scripts from New York to the West Coast, only to get rejection letters from somebody's assistant, I was like, ooh, my financial aid needs to start getting paid, right? My student debt. And so I took a job at Chase Manhattan Bank in the call center business, a 9-to-5 job on the phone as a customer service rep. And then over time, I got promoted to manager. I became a stand-in for the training manager. And when the business said, hey, it's too expensive to operate in Manhattan, we're taking this thing to Rochester, I had the opportunity to voluntarily join that trip. And I became a training manager and then a call center manager. And I'll tell you, the rigor of that corporate training, I mean, rigor, it's really a very, it's a big focus on what a company like JP Morgan Chase focuses on. I rely on that every day, right? So one of the things that I'm kind of known for is running headlong into human resources issues. Like I always approach the management issues with a degree of vigor and excitement because I've been well trained, but I gravitate toward, people problems. But when I started as an outsider coming from that other industry, I had no credibility. It didn't matter what I was trying to be intentional about. I was coming from another business. Nobody cared that I was trying to write before I went to
Yeah.
Chase for 6 years. They were like, why did this guy get this job? And how could he add value? And so I didn't have a chance to show up as comfortably myself as I am now, right? I think I was always trying to win favor, earn credibility. And I probably wasn't I definitely wasn't the nicest version of myself, right? So it was almost like I had a chip on my shoulder, like I got this job and, I'm going to do this job. So I was pretty aggressive in it until I started to maybe see the impacts of that.
Trailer Geeks and Teaser Gods is brought to you by 2496 Sound and Music. 2496 Sound and Music has been publishing music and sound design in Hollywood for over 2 decades. While most traditional libraries started with music first, 2496 started from the ground up, creating killer sound design elements for trailers and film campaigns. Then they started building a music catalog which matches the sound design catalog perfectly, creating a powerful blend of sound, music, and emotion. Their founder, Lenny Jones, who's a pal of mine, really good guy, he is a motion picture and television sound editor with credits on top shows including Ancient Aliens and Unsolved Mysteries. 2496's sound design can be heard on current trailer campaigns, including many of the summer's box office hits. 2496's composers and sound designers hail from all over the globe, giving their clients not just 24/7 service, but an international style that will appeal to a global audience. They excel at rapid customizations and creative revisions, minimizing delays in your creative process. If you're looking for the sound of the next for your next trailer campaign, check out 2496 Sound and Music at 2496sfx.com. That's the numbers 2496 and SFX like sound effects. That's 2496sfx.com. Trailer Geeks and Teaser Gods is brought to you by Soundstripe. So if you're an editor, a producer, a creative exec, a music supervisor, or even a podcaster like me, if you're a content creator of all stripes, if you will, and you're looking for the perfect library of music and sound effects, check out Soundstripe. With over 10,000 high-quality tracks, including music from Grammy-winning artists, Soundstripe makes music licensing hassle-free. Believe me, I've tried it. I've been on there. I've navigated around. It was really terrific. It was really easy to use. So with a simple subscription, you get unlimited access to a vast catalog, downloadable stems for creative flexibility, and AI song editing to customize tracks effortlessly. Plus, their seamless integration with Premiere, which is what most of my editor friends are on, it means a smoother editing experience. If you're ready to level up your production game with properly licensed, high-quality music and sound effects, head over to soundstripe.com/trailergeeks and save 10% with code TRAILERGEEKS. That's soundstripe.com/trailergeeks and code TRAILERGEEKS. How did you get a shot? You were working at Chase professionally, and to your point, like you were writing scripts, but that's not necessarily something that shows up on a resume.
Right, that's right.
How'd you end up landing a job at Sony?
It's always you always hear that saying, it's about who you know, and in many cases it really is. So Christine Birch,
Birchie, love Birchie,
who my brother and her brother were best friends in high school.
Oh, okay.
When I was writing and I moved up to Rochester, I reached out to her brother Garth and I said, "Hey, do you think your sister might, take a call from me, or can I reach out to her and tell her what I'm trying to do?" And he said, "Yeah, talk to her." So I reached out to Christine. She was kind enough to say, "Look, send me the things you're writing. If I don't think it's absolute trash, right? Because Christine, I'll share it with people who I trust and, see if you can get some meetings." And so she set us up, my partner and I, on some informational meetings with, producers and folks in the business. And when I went back to Rochester after that trip to LA, my writing partner was like, "That's it, I'm moving. I need to be out there." And I said, "Yeah, I'm risk averse. That whole freelance thing didn't work out for me. I'm not moving to LA without work." And ultimately, when the banking businesses started to consolidate and Chase and Chemical Bank merged, I was out of work, and Chase said to me, "Hey, we have an opportunity for you to come back to Manhattan. We've got a job for you, or you can take a severance check." And I said, "Let me take the severance check." And I called Christine again. I said, "I'm thinking about making the move now. Is there anything out there that you might be aware of?" And she said, "You know what? I may have something. I may have something in mind. I want you to meet with some people, and if they think you might be suited for this, we'll see how it goes." I didn't know she had a job open on her team. So I went to LA again. I met with all of these folks. I did a round of interviews. I went back to Rochester packing up because I knew I was going to be out of a job soon. And she called me up and said, "I've got a job as a director of market research. I think you're smart. I think your skills are transferable. I'm going to take a chance on you." And so it was that who you know, and the courage to reach back out and say, "Hey, I'm going to make this move. Is there anything going on?" And the fact that, she took that swing, took that chance on me.
So you had the courage to reach out in the first place, and then she took the chance on you, so you're given an opportunity, but then you got to deliver, right?
That's right. Yeah, that's right. And I think that goes back to how I showed up, right? Kind of trying to figure out, okay, I've got this imposter syndrome now.
Yeah,
I got the gig. Now what do I do? And that took a while. And I think for me, starting in research, learning the business, and then there was a moment in time early in my career at Sony where the company said, "We're going to put more focus on this whole internet thing.
Right.
And we're going to go search for somebody." And I said, "Hey, one of the things I did in Chase was I ran a PC banking call center, right? Tech help for people banking online. I was an early internet adopter. I was a bit of a data person, a bit of a techie. Dealing with people and their financial woes is one of the most emotional conversations you'll have outside of maybe family and movies." And I said, "These skills are transferable. I'll be your digital person. You don't need to look elsewhere." And so I looked at a problem I could solve for the company and pitched myself as the solution to that problem. And one of the things I found was back then, and even to this day a little bit, people are a little afraid of the digital space. And so I could be a subject matter expert that they would leave alone, right? And let me do some things.
So I'm trying to place it in time. And I would imagine there's always like, oh, we got to do what they're doing kind of a thing in the entertainment industry. Were there certain campaigns that were breakout campaigns that your people, was it the Bob Levin days of Sony?
Yeah, it was the Bob Levin days. Christine reported to Bob. He was head of marketing, worldwide marketing. And it was, I became a digital exec in 2000.
Okay.
So we were, as a company, starting to think about franchise management.
Okay.
Right. And the company started to re-engineer itself and say, let's build some brand teams to focus on franchises. Turned out that the franchises couldn't sustain that restructuring. And
that's interesting.
Right. Because some of them didn't work. Like Godzilla was one of those movies that they said, we need a brand to manage this because we're going to make many of these. Right. We made one of those.
The funny thing is that Rob Fried was involved in that movie, and that was part of the digitization or the commoditization of franchises. And I think it was Godzilla. I might be wrong about this, but I think it was Godzilla that he used a digital deployment, if you will, to commoditize and to sell merchandise. And I'm just thinking of some of the campaigns, some of the movies, some of the IP that you were able to go to Bob Levin and the other folks that you're working with and saying, okay, this took off largely because of
Look, I'll tell you, as I look back, Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 2002 is the one for me, that was it was a career defining campaign, right? As a digital person, we had an IP that was, decades old, right? So a fandom that was both had aged, right? These weren't, if you were a fan of Spider-Man, there were probably more older fans than there were younger. That means fans with a strong point of view. It was in a particular genre. It was a fanboy kind of a movie, and those were if I lean into a stereotype, those were the early adopters of internet at the time. And we started building things to curry favor with those early cinephiles who had a point of view on what they hoped this movie would be.
Yeah.
I remember as we were prepping for Spider-Man and we started to see the campaign for The Matrix happening.
Oh,
I remember Josh Goldstein and I were just kind of in awe of what the promise of The Matrix was.
yeah.
And we both still tell this story. We played hooky one day and left the studio at lunch and then went to Westwood to go see The Matrix. And it was, for me, one of those things, really enjoying the cinematic experience, walking out of that theater, thinking about what our campaign needed to be. We were very inspired by that, kind of brought that energy back, to the folks we worked with. And that's really exciting, right? Sometimes we think when you talk about commoditization, sometimes the releasing movies can feel a little rote.
Yeah.
But if you can show up with the passion for storytelling and connecting with an audience, that's everything. I mean, that's why this job is still so much fun.
Oh, man. The other thing I'm curious about, you were an early adapter, especially when it comes to advertising, marketing, on the digital side. I was curious how, I know one or two of the stories, just being a headhunter fantasy league geek of this industry. I know one or two of the stories of how you did it, but how were you able to identify talent and build the kind of team that you were at Sony?
It's interesting. There's a saying, dance with who you came in with, right? And I, early in my digital career, focused on relationships with a couple of agencies, and almost perhaps to the detriment of getting the most diverse ideas, a breadth of ideas. But I established deep relationships with a couple of agencies, and they became my go-tos. Not dissimilar to how folks who cut trailers have some go-to, agencies who just always deliver. And we had a shorthand, right? A company called DNA Studio that a good friend named John Moshe ran. Company called Trigger that a good friend named Jason Yim runs. Like, those agencies became the people that I would always look to say, okay, what's happening in the space and how do we innovate? And then as I looked around, we would say, okay, who's doing great things, right? Gordon Pattison, when he was at New Line on the Lord of the Rings campaign, that was another one that used to keep us up at night, because in a very lo-fi way, he was building community around a property that had a real dedicated fan base, right? And we were trying to take from what he did and said, okay, how do we apply that? So we would there was a mutual respect happening in that space at the time. And I remember seeing the Angry Birds campaign for, right. that was integrated into the movie Rio, and Jake Zim over at Fox had done that. And that was the first time anything like that had happened, right? Where a game that was in pop culture that had billions of downloads as a casual game was integrated into a movie campaign in a way that was kind of seamless, right? It was pretty extraordinary. So I invited Jake to join our team. And one of the things we did with those relationships he had was on Men in Black 3.
Oh, right.
Right, which I want to say was 2012, maybe, I think. I'm not sure. But on Men in Black 3, Rovio was launching Angry Birds Space. And
2012.
2012.
Yeah.
And Jake Zim, James Lasseter, the producer of Men in Black, and I went to Finland to go meet with Rovio. And we wanted to see how the launch of Angry Birds Space could be connected to Men in Black 3 so that the launch of the game could be the closing push for our marketing campaign for the movie. And ultimately, it didn't work out. The timing didn't work out. And there were just too many IP-related issues that we couldn't overcome. But again, that kind of innovation, right, where it was like, okay, let's go to Finland and pitch these guys, right, was pretty exciting. And so I ended up recruiting people who had worked at some of the agencies I'd worked with. And as you've seen in this business, people tend not to leave a lot of these jobs. They stay in these jobs. So some of my Sony team is still there. I haven't been at Sony since 2016, and some of the same folks are still there who I brought in.
Yeah.
Because people don't leave, right? They and there aren't that many of these jobs. Right. So, that's the other challenging part about this.
I have so many questions now.
Yes, sir.
So one is, I would imagine that you learned something even in your freelance writing days where you had to pitch an idea and paint a picture for someone who had no idea what you were talking about. Did that serve you well when you were pitching campaign ideas? Or were the filmmakers and other folks, other stakeholders in the campaigns, were they already pretty savvy, relatively speaking?
It's a great question. Because people always ask me how I feel about the fact that I didn't become a successful writer, and it became a skill that I applied to marketing. And as a digital person, if we were going to pitch something like, I remember there was this period of time where there was an asset called a visualizer, right? Where you would download a piece of music and there'd be a 3D animated character moving to that music. And I remember on a Men in Black movie, we were pitching that it would be those worms in the visualizer. And so I had to pitch Walter Parks and Laurie McDonald and Steven Spielberg in a meeting about how that was going to add value to the campaign by bringing those characters to life on a music platform, and the skill of being able to craft an elevator pitch for something as odd as a music visualizer, right?
Yeah.
So I find myself, even to this day, I always think about, okay, what's the 2-sentence version of this? When I talk to my team, they all know, and they laugh at me because they say, I got to go talk to Michael Moses about something. Give me the 2 sentences that are going to help me close this, right? And then they'll send me an email that's 2 pages long, and I'm like, guys, I 2 sentences.
2 sentences.
Right? But I think that served me well. And eventually, I like to use a sports metaphor. So I'm either in the fourth quarter of my career or on the back nine, or whatever, however you want to put it. I'll probably write something again, but probably long form, right? I think I'm excited to even be here talking to you in this environment, because I think the podcast space is incredibly exciting and another great way for storytelling, right? And so I haven't lost the desire to tell stories. I'll just do it differently than how I thought I was going to do it.
Trailer Geeks and Teaser Gods is brought to you by the Golden Trailer Awards. For folks who are just starting to get plugged in, the GTAs is an unconventional ceremony that honors excellence in feature film trailers, teasers, and movie marketing. Or as some folks like to think of it, it's the award ceremony for the short attention span. We all just celebrated the 25th Golden Trailer Awards. So would that be the Silver Golden Trailer Awards? Either way, it was a terrific show. Monica and Evie do such a wonderful job putting it together. Tons of fun, so much awesome work across the board. And mostly, it was just great to be together as a community. So keep an eye out for a number of exciting developments over the next year. Just make sure to stay plugged in at goldentrailer.com. For there a ton of exciting developments. That's goldentrailer.com. What kinds of stories are rattling around in your, or what, maybe not ideas that you're working on, but stories that especially resonate with you?
For whatever reason, I love police procedural stuff, right? So whenever we're in a green light meeting, I'm always the guy raising my hand saying, yeah, let's do that. And someone will say, well, that's not particularly theatrical anymore, but I'm the guy who loves, procedural thrillers, those kinds of things. And I think Rian Johnson kind of raised the bar on how those were perceived with Knives Out.
So one of the things that fascinates me is the chemistry of people. And when I think about your time there, some of my favorite people, I may he rest in peace, Jeffrey Amer was so kind to me. He was a bit of a mentor to me when I had I could never do anything for him. Goldstein the same way. Like Goldstein would take my calls pretty early on, and I was in a place in my career where I could never do anything for those guys. I could never return any favor that they would ever give me. They were so gracious. But I also think about the talent and the intelligence, Birchie and Dana and, even Joe Shields that we were talking about, and Tommy, of course, the creative genius. What were you able to cross disciplines and glean and learn from the creatives and just all the different disciplines that were there? And if so, what kinds of things did you learn?
Yeah, I mean, I think as I aspired to become a head of marketing, I needed to become a generalist. I needed to actually learn more about the discipline of creative. I needed to see how that really drove strategy across the department. Mentorship isn't something that people easily take on. And so as I look back on all those folks you named, I can't say that they were mentors in the truest definition of the word, but they each did something, for me during my career where it enabled me to kind of advance my own skill set. And Amer was one of those guys who was kind of tough as a grizzly.
Yeah.
And super transparent, but a guy who was always supportive of me. And when there were conflicts in my early digital career between marketing and then one of the in-house teams that was doing digital stuff, Amer tenaciously supported me in that role. And I'll never forget that. Like he was there was no BS with him. He would just, be very straight and direct. And I always appreciate that, even if the news isn't good. I'd rather have the straight dope. I mean, I think, and then Goldstein, who anyone who knows him will know that he is a tale teller. And so I think I learned a lot, listening to him and talking to him. And I go back to that, to that Matrix moment and thinking about the way he approached creative. I remember it was a long time ago when Sony Corporate was trying to launch a brand campaign, and they came to Levin and said, okay, I need some help with this. And Levin had recruited Josh, and he had a campaign that he was building where SONY, he was focused on the word on that lived within Sony, and how when his brother was using the PlayStation, he was on, or how when a moviegoer sat down into a theater seat, they were on, or how when a filmmaker stepped onto a stage, they were on. And it was a brilliant, brilliant campaign that never saw the light of day. But I watched him as he was building that, and I just remember being in a room with him when he was pitching it, and I was like, oh man, this guy is, some next level stuff, right?
Yeah, yes.
But yeah, I think watching and taking notes from everybody that I've encountered. I always tell people every interaction is an interview, right? Act like you are in an interview. Ask the right questions. If you're at the table, use that voice at the table.
Yeah. Now, I want to talk to you more about being on the other side of the table in terms of mentoring. We'll get to that in a second. But before we leave Sony, you by the time you were done with your chapter there, you were president of marketing. I'd love to know, I don't know if there's a particular equation or a recipe, but every campaign seems like it would be different. But how would you is there like a mindset, or is there a particular strategy, things that you had to check off in terms of a campaign? How would you approach each campaign?
Yeah, look, the beauty of starting my career in research means I'm always thinking about the audience. I'm always thinking about who is this thing for, right? The movie gets greenlit with or without my input, right? In most cases throughout my career, I wasn't asked, but the movie exists. And that means that there's a strong belief that it's for someone. And so I always started in a place of who's this for and what is it needing to evoke for them for it to be effective? What do we need the campaign to be offering to those moviegoers for them to say, yep, I'm leaving my couch. This is the one. It's not that movie, it's this movie. And so Michael Moses, who is CMO at Universal, who I report to, he and I always have this fun tension because I'm always talking about positioning statements. He's like, what is that? Why do you need that? We don't let's. And so for me, that's kind of how my brain works, right? I say, okay, what's the essence of all the emotion that we want the campaign to articulate? And, of course, the creative defines the campaign, but every other department has to figure out how to be evocative in the right way, right? Publicity has to evoke the right stuff. Sometimes they have to evoke that our characters have chemistry and there's the right amount of comedy, right? Our multicultural team has to find the culturally thematic or relevant things that make an audience go, oh yeah, I see myself, or I feel invited to that movie. That's not exclusive just because the actors don't look like me. I see myself because that's a relatable narrative, right? So that's always the place I start. And we talk a lot about those things throughout the campaign. As we're inching toward opening, we do a meeting at, 8 weeks out and then 3.5 weeks out, and it's all about optimizing the message. Are we doing the things that are generating feedback from an audience that lets us know they have ownership? They really want this thing, Never gets easy. So in terms of checking a box, there are steps we always take, but it's never like a template.
So know thy audience, to thine own audience be true, right?
Yes.
How do you figure out who the audience is?
Look, it's research, casting a wide net and then narrowing that down. But if you think about all the people, that I work with between, Moses and Julian Noble on the international side, and Maria Pekarovskaya and Patrick Starr and Joe Weiss and our creatives. And
now you're my happy place, man. You
right?
named some of my favorite people in the world.
Fabian Castro, who runs our multicultural team. Like, everybody has an innate knowledge of their space, of what they do. And so they're bringing to the table a sense of audience before we ever talk to a consumer. The good news is our research process helps us refine that. But at some point, and, I've seen it on campaigns where we say, research be damned, we're going this way because our gut tells us so, right? And I think you got to be able to do that. You have to not follow the data out the window to the point where you've made something that feels inauthentic.
So you mentioned the word before, evoke, a few times. How do you, let's say you're able to craft a pretty specific avatar of who the audience is, right? How do you get from that avatar to being able to evoke a certain reaction from them?
That's I think that's the art and science of it, because it's not always that the avatar we build has the exact behavior of somebody who might be standing next to them. For example, we've done a lot of targeting consumers through zip code regions and geo-targeting. We do a lot of A/B testing and match market testing from a media standpoint. But at some point, there's a neighborhood in that zip code that behaves differently than the other people in that zip code, right? And so, you may say, oh, they're all in the same region and therefore, and that just may not be true. And so we always have to be aware of what are the levers that might trigger that emotion for somebody, what might make somebody feel left out. Or I'll give you an example. I won't name the movie, but as I was leaving Sony, there was a comedy movie that the team was developing the campaign for. I had already announced my departure, and I went to Tom Rothman and said, hey, man, I'm going to recuse myself from meetings because everybody knows I'm leaving. And he said, nope, you know what? He's like, you're here. I value your opinion. I want you to stay right up until the end. So I was in a meeting where the team was presenting creative. I was sort of sitting in the cheap seats in the back because I was not actively participating. And somebody put something up that was that had the potential to be perceived as racially insensitive. And Tom saw it and he was like, wait a minute. He's like, guys, you can't do that, right? And he's like, I'm not letting that go out. You can't do that. I had already weighed in with the team and said, hey, folks, you can't do that for these reasons. But they were like, this dude's gone, right? We're doing it. And I remember Tom said, I don't like that piece of creative, so we're not doing it. And I was sitting in the commissary that day, and he came up to me and he said, it's a tough spot. He said, but I need your help on those things. I need your voice when something like that looks like it's not the right thing. He was like, we've got to be better at that. And so imagine, and I think as the team was building the campaign, they weren't thinking that the creative that was going to be seen in bus shelters in front of Black and brown people might trigger a different response than if it were in front of, other people. Right. And sort of those were the eyes that I sort of approached that analysis with, right? What might go wrong on this if somebody sees that and doesn't get the joke? Now, on the flip side, before I went to Universal and I saw the campaign for Get Out, and there was outdoor all over the place. I was driving to work, driving to Sony, and I saw the outdoor and it said, you don't belong here, get out. And before I knew it was a movie, I was like, what? So provocative, I don't know, intriguing, but the whole campaign owned that point of view in a way where it was fully appropriate for that campaign to be that provocative given what that subject matter was.
Yeah.
It wasn't like a one-off joke on a one sheet and then none of the rest of the campaign was doing it. The whole campaign said, we are going to embrace the subtext of race in this horror wrapper. And I think that's sometimes what we have to look at. It's I think for me, a pretty important requirement for the marketing team to say, okay, does this fit the whole campaign? Is this a one-off? If it is a one-off, does it undermine everything else we're doing? How does the audience respond to this? If they respond in a way that's got some negativity, is that good for our campaign, right? I think those are the things that it also makes the job, again, interesting and exciting at the same time.
Now, you mentioned that you were leaving Sony. I think that was in the middle of 2016.
2016, yeah.
Did you already have a plan of what you were doing, or was there a lot of uncertainty at that point?
It was literally, there was a point in my career where I stayed too long. I stayed longer than I should have. I'll say this without, I'm not looking for sympathy. I think the company no longer needed what I was offering. And I don't mean that in a like, woe is me. The team had evolved in a way where I needed to move on for me and for the team to kind of just, move into the next era. And so they were the company was great. I had been there almost 20 years, just shy of 20 years, and I had hoped to retire from that company. I was like, oh man, this is it. I'm going to just, live out the rest of my career here. And when I decided to quit, and they threw a lovely party for me, when I was leaving. And one of the things that stayed with me at that goodbye party was Josh Greenstein got up to speak about me, and he said, the best thing I can say about Dwight is that he was our conscience.
Oh.
And I was like, and I was kind of stunned, right? And I was like, oh, he actually did see me, right? And it was something that I just found to be one of the best compliments that I could get at the time, really stayed with me. But yeah, I was there longer than my use, if you will.
Interesting. What kinds of questions arose in you for that chapter? Because it was a couple of years before you landed at Universal.
Yeah. So what I did was I went off and did a couple of years of consulting work. I worked with a premium video on demand startup. I worked on a telecast that Lorene Powell Jobs and Emerson Collective were launching with an organization called the XQ Institute, which was really focused on rethinking the public school system, which hadn't had a kind of a revision in about 100 years, right? I worked at a company called VRC, the virtual reality company, a guy named Guy Primus, who used to work at Overbrook, was running that company. And as I looked at all the things I was doing, they were in areas where I was like, oh, I'm actually continuing to learn stuff, right? They weren't necessarily, no one was calling me and saying, we need a marketing consultant, but they were calling me and saying, we need a digitally savvy marketing generalist who can help us do this thing. And it was a lot of fun. Now, if I go back to where our conversation started, I hate freelancing, right? So at some point I was like, okay, guys,
I got to get a job.
I got to, right? And there's only so many of these jobs, right? There's, 5 or 6 of us, and we all worked at the same place. If you look around, you go, oh, Mark Weinstock and Josh Goldstein and Dwight Caines and Ricky Strauss, and like, we're all sort of just playing musical chairs.
That's right. Now Ricky's at App. Yeah,
right.
Funny. It's such a treasure trove that you open up when you start to really look at who was at Sony back in the day. And but that's also, that period was also. It looks like when you started teaching. Is that right?
So so I had always guest lectured for the entirety of my career. Whenever Syracuse, was doing something in LA and they'd invite me to come in and do a guest lecture, I would always do, like a one-off. But during the pandemic, a colleague of mine reached out and said, hey, somebody in the UCLA film group wants to launch a marketing class for their MFA students. Would you consider doing it? And I said, yeah, I'll take the call, So I spoke with them, and it was during the pandemic. We were fully remote. And I built a class that was about 35 students, fully on Zoom, a marketing class. And what I wanted to do was build a narrative structure. Normally, most of these classes, you're parading guest lecturers in, and I wanted it to have a real narrative. So I said, I'm going to give you a movie, a classic movie, and we're going to pretend that it's being rebooted. And what you're going to do as your final is you're going to write a campaign brief for the rebooted version of this movie. And every guest who comes in front of you is going to give you insight into that aspect of what you have to build in your campaign, right? And so when I started that, I gave this UCLA class the movie Misery.
Okay.
And I said, let's pretend that Misery is being directed by Jordan Peele.
Oh,
let's pretend that the Kathy Bates' character is played by Anne Hathaway, and that the James Caan character is played by Denzel Washington.
Oh, man.
Let's think about what the racial dynamic does to the storytelling. Now that you have this guy captive by his biggest fan, how does race change that? I cast the supporting actors with, I think the agent who's played by Lauren Bacall. I think I said that's Viola Davis. And so I gave them, here are your elements. Now you pick a release date on this calendar. Tell me why you're going to land this there and build a campaign, right? And it was great, great fun. And these MFA students were, brilliant, right? It was a lot of fun. And so when Syracuse asked me to come and teach, I brought the same class to Syracuse, retooled it for undergrads. And now instead of giving them the movies, because I find the undergrads have less experience with the filmography I was offering, I said, pick a movie that you have some connection to, a movie that made an impact in your life. And we're going to do a re-release campaign. It's coming back to theaters, right? A movie that's got to be at least 10 years old so that you can build a campaign. But you're now allowed to bring all of the pedigree and accolades and achievements of the cast that was in it when it launched. Let's see how that fits in a campaign today. Where would you put it? Why would you release it there? And so we're in the early part of the semester on that. And it's great fun. And for me, it's always exciting to be in front of young folks who don't bring any baggage to the table.
Do you end up hiring any kids out of these classes that you're teaching?
So far, no.
Okay. All right.
I will say that a couple of students of mine, one of them is landed a job as an assistant for a senior executive at Universal Pictures. The other is in the Page program in New York. My TA from UCLA is launching a program that is cultivating talent, diverse talent in a filmmaking program. So, there's always a handful every semester that are achievers that I continue to hear about their successes. But for me, it's a lot of fun.
So you've been very involved at the Academy as well as at Universal in terms of diversity, equity, inclusion. What are some of the initiatives? First of all, what would you like to see, whether it's tomorrow, a year from now, 10 years from now? And then also, what are some of the initiatives that you've seen that are working?
Here's what I'll say about that, because this is a really tricky area. I have found that at many companies, including the Academy, we've seen an exit of people in DEI roles. And when companies initially invested in those roles, it was because we were all watching the veil being lifted on social justice, right? We were watching terrible things happen before our eyes at a grand scale, whether it was, George Floyd's murder and on the internet where we all got to view it, or AAPI, or anti-Semitism, or Islamophobia, or whatever it is. Like, we're all witnessing this stuff. When these DEI roles were created, it was with the intent of changing the culture of organizations so that people understood how to acknowledge diversity and what true diversity, what that really means, how to acknowledge equity. And equity is not equality. Equity is about leveling or decreasing the opportunity gap, right? It doesn't mean everybody gets a medal. It means, how do we actually get a chance to meet a Dwight Caines who grew up in Queens, who maybe didn't go to UCLA, and have him be considered for this job, even though he may never cross my path otherwise? Like, how do we create equity? And then on the inclusion side, some people mistake that for invitation. Hey, we let everybody in the room, and so that's inclusion. And it's no, the people in the room have to be able to be acknowledged and show up authentically, and we have to let them feel comfortable expressing some of those things that are inherently about who they are and how they interpret the work. And so there was a big investment in all of that around 2020 through 2021. And now, including at the Academy, you're seeing people leave these big jobs. And one of the reasons, I think, is as the business changes, everyone says, okay, how is that investment generating revenue for us today that I can point to? How did the DEI team or my diversity executive bring in revenue when there's a decline in, movie attendance or an acceleration in streaming or a strike that has made the theatrical slate thin and therefore less money coming in? How did the DEI work generate revenue for us? And I don't know that those words are being spoken out loud, but I know that analysis is happening. And that's why some of those people are leaving. And the other thing that they will tell you, because I've spoken to some of the folks in those jobs who've left, is that I talked about it on this conversation, Corey, the outsider status. They never felt fully like they were part of the team. So they got the job, and then
you're talking about the DEI,
DEI folks, right? Yeah. They got the job in the DEI role, and then we're the only advocates for the work, right? And you need allies. You need people saying, "Yep, this is how we're going to change our culture." Like, we have to adopt certain things. So I guess what I would like to see, and I don't know if I'm answering your question precisely, but is, the acknowledgement that when people show up at work, or when we think about our consumer, they have a very specifically unique life experience that dictates how they move through the planet, right? Whether it's what entertainment they want or don't want, or how they show up in the job, or what makes them afraid to speak up in a room, or what may make them, like I was, maybe put a chip on my shoulder and kind of barrel through the early part of my career, right? All of that comes from who I am and what I experienced. And so I think we need leaders who are more open and aware of that, of the human element, right? Because there's a skill you need to do these jobs. You must know how to cut trailers. You must know how to do publicity. You must know how to buy media. But each one of those people in those roles brings themselves to the role. And I think you get better work when they're allowed to say, hey, when that poster's on a bus shelter in Black and brown neighborhoods, that particular tagline is offensive. Mm-hmm. And unless we want to really lean in and do that everywhere and have that be our campaign, we can't do that today.
So tell me if I'm hearing you right. So your who you are and your life experience and the diverse array of folks that are part of a team bring who they are and their different life experiences. It's important to continue to do that, to diversify our portfolio, if you will. Number one, and this is what I'm hearing from you, number one, because it's the right thing to do, but also because it's good for business.
It's great for business,
yeah,
right?
I mean, because you bring in someone with a particular life. I've shared this story before where when Dana came on the first time, I heard from somebody who said, I heard me. I finally heard me. Like, I love Bob, Bob Israel. I love the stories, I admire him so much, but she didn't hear herself in Bob Israel,
Yeah.
I remember, real quick story. When I was in New York, I was a stockbroker during the day, I was doing theater at night. And I was in this show that was about a theater ensemble that was formed right after World War II, a Yiddish theater, which is very close to my heart because I have my great-grandmother was in the Yiddish theater in the early 20th century. I had family that, came from, it was Russia at the time, Ukraine, as well as family in the Germans, up in Germany, some of whom, died in the concentration camps. So that play was very close. I happened to be the only Jew in the cast. I ended up getting fired because because I got a note from the director happened to be Chris. And if your name's Chris, you're probably not Jewish, but he just happened not to be Jewish. But he said the note was, Corey, I think there's too much in your tuchus. And I'm like, I just lost my shit. I'm like, Christopher Goyim, director, don't tell me how much is in my tuchus. I'm the only one here who knows how much is in my tuchus. All right. So now I laugh at it. It was heartbreaking at the time.
Yeah.
But I was livid. Like, that's my story. That's my family.
Yes.
You're talking like it's a funny way to talk about it, but it like struck at the heart of like, who are you, man?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
you know what's interesting about that is because there's a debate. Who gets to tell your story, right? Now, some may say, only I and people like me can tell my story. I think as long as like sometimes the people with means will tell the story. I remember when Catherine Bigelow was doing Detroit. People said, you don't have the right to tell that story.
Right.
And one of the things she said, I remember, I think she was sitting with Trevor Noah. She said, I love the importance of this story and I have the means to tell it. And I was like, oh shit, you know? And so I think that's really important. Now, you want to make sure you surround that person of means or with means with the right subject matter experts or people that the story resonates with, or the Corey Nathans who, right, you want to make sure that you don't look at the production and go, well, there's nobody here with a personal relationship to the story, so I don't care how much research you did. I still think it's inauthentic, right? And I think, you know, that's part of the challenge. Some people would probably disagree with me that, you have to look like me to tell my story. And I say you got to do the research and then surround yourself with producers who know and look like me.
Yeah. It's I don't think there's any right answer. I think I certainly don't have the answer. So I want to get back to mentoring for a second, teaching and mentoring. Why? Why is that so important to you?
I went to Syracuse University, upstate New York, giant school. School was too big for me. It was the school I wanted to go to. I wanted to study communications. And I found that when I got there, in the course of 4 years, including studying abroad in London, I had 2 Black professors. And neither of them particularly liked me. I didn't have a relationship with them, you know. And so there's a saying, if you see it, you can be it. And I didn't see myself at that school for 4 years.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize, I did realize, I shouldn't say that. I realized, I again, felt like an outsider, right? That's sort of a theme. And I was like, well, how am I going to do this career that I think I'd be suited for if nobody in front of me looks like me, right? Does that mean that they don't take chances on people like me? Does that mean the university doesn't believe that they should put people like me in front of me? Like, what is it, right? And so when I graduated, I'd never gone back to campus. Hadn't gone back for 35 years. First time I went back was they asked me to speak at the convocation for Newhouse a couple of years ago. That was literally the first time I set foot on the campus. But the reason I teach was I was like, okay, I need to be someone that someone might look at and say, oh, I see myself. I can do that job.
Yeah.
I see me. It's the old adage, right? We talk about movies, create a window or a mirror, right? And you want that window into worlds unknown and things that are, aspirational and unique, or the mirror where you say, that's my life, or I know that guy, or that woman is like my next door neighbor, or that's me. I didn't get the mirror. And so the teaching was, I joked with you that how much time you have for this conversation, because I like to tell a story. Because I'm a storyteller by nature, I wanted to be able to stand in front of people and say, and inspire them to say, I never thought I could do the job. And now because I interacted with Dwight, I'm going to try and figure out how to do that job. So I also love it. And when the job is a grind, and it often is, and I step into the classroom, it's super energizing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, for what it's worth, I sit down with people every day. I have I try to have a lunch with a new person every day, from young folks that are just starting out their career to, people who are very, very accomplished. And part of a conversation often is where people see themselves going based on their frames of reference. So frames of reference often is like a mentoring person or somebody that they know from afar and they've tracked with their career. And your name often comes up. Your name, if not the most frequently, as frequently as any other name in the business, partly because you were paving road in the digital space as you were coming up through Sony, but also because of your leadership positions at a couple of major studios, but also just because of the prominent role that you have not been afraid to take, especially when the shit hit the fan a couple different times. You were the guy that people look to and like, it's kind of like when you're on an airplane, you hit some major turbulence, you look at the flight attendants, are they cool? Like, if they're cool, you're cool. Like when the shit hit the fan at a couple different points, it was you that people were looking to, and you weren't afraid to take the proverbial mic and say, we're going to be okay. This is how we're going to get through it. I want to, part of that, you can address that, but I also wanted to ask you, I've also made a point of tracking with you through, especially the last 4 or 5 years. And sometimes I'm reading some of the stuff that you're putting out, and I'm thinking, how's that dude doing? So that's my main question. How's Dwight doing? How you doing?
I'm terrified, right? I mentioned that our democracy is fragile and crumbling, and the world is, full of chaos, and that terrifies me on an existential level. Personally, I'm doing okay. I think of myself as someone who look, if you see me heading for the emergency exit, right, then trouble's coming, right? Because I tend to have a good sense of, hey, if I show up for work, it's because I'm mentally ready to be here. If I'm doing my thing and operating as if everything's normal, take that as a good sign. But if you see me running for the exit, know that trouble's coming. And so I've operated that way, where when I've had moments like the Sony moment was a real moment where I was like, I feel actual depression, like a blanket, right? I had this amazing office that overlooked the rainbow, in the Thalberg building. And I remember the day I decided to quit, I rang my wife up and I said, hey, honey, you got a minute? She was like, yeah, I'm literally stepping out. I got 1 minute. And I said, I'm going to quit the job today. And she said, okay. All right, well, I'll see you at dinner. I was like, great. Super supportive.
That's great.
She knew exactly where I was and what I needed. And I just needed her to say, I got you. And so I've operated with when I'm not good, I got to go. And so right now, in terms of how I'm doing good. Trying to provide, trying to be available and present for the family. I do have regrets about not being as present over the past 27 years. So that's a huge focus of mine. But yeah.
Every day is a new act of creation, man. Every day is another opportunity. I'm so grateful to my kids because I have a lot of the same feelings that I was struggling to pay the mortgage, and I was focused so much on figuring that out that sometimes I wasn't there even when I was there, I wasn't there for them. But every day is a new opportunity. They've been gracious and forgiving with me to just be there for them today.
Yeah.
The other thing you've mentioned a couple times now, so I do the other hat that I wear is in the politics and, that world. I just want to encourage you, we're going to be okay. I become friends with some of the guys that track with this stuff. Mike Madrid in particular comes to mind. He's this brilliant. He, as they say, Mike eats numbers for breakfast in the politics world. He's especially focusing. He's he grew up not too far from here and focuses on the Latino vote, which is a critical demographic in many of the key races. But Mike said, just don't take any one poll. Like watch where it's moving.
Yeah.
You can always look under the hood and look at some of the crosstabs and stuff. But he said, just, check in with me in August, September or so. And if I'm worried then we can all start getting worried. But like track with where things are moving, So I just wanted to address that. But I want to ask some fun questions now.
Yeah.
Favorite campaigns?
2011, Josh went to Universal. 2012, they released a movie called Safe House. And I remember seeing the campaign and said, that's got Josh all over it. I don't know who the creative exec on the campaign was, but I said, I feel Josh's imprint on that campaign. It was Denzel, Ryan Reynolds. It's in the genre I love. And I was just like, oh man, and that trailer converted me, It's so funny. All my movies are like clustered in the same period of time. I want to say the movie, The Pursuit of Happiness, that we had at Sony. Right, that movie is gut wrenching. You got a guy who's just trying to make it, right? The whole movie, right? The whole movie.
There are certain little things that he picked up on, like the phone, the way he did the phone in there. Absolutely.
And one of the things we did in the campaign, Val Van Gelder was the head of marketing. I was reporting to Val. I was still in digital, and we did a campaign called Pursue It.
Oh.
And we said, okay, let's launch a campaign where we give internships to deserving young people, right? In the movie, Will Smith's character, Chris Gardner, is trying to get work, and he's fighting hard to get this, financial services internship.
Yeah.
It's not even a job, right?
Yeah.
And so we said, okay, what if we gave people internships? So we reached out to companies like The Gap and Morgan Stanley, NBC, the NFL, People, PlayStation, and we put together a contest where people would submit a kind of a statement of why they deserved an internship. That was one of my favorite campaigns because at the end of it, we gave a handful of people roles in these big companies that they would never have otherwise had an opportunity for. Now, that was kind of early days of digital, so we didn't get the earned media value that I would have wanted off of it. But I still look back at that and say, man, a little bit ahead of its time, right? What else? Obviously, what we're doing at Universal, look, we've had an amazing year. Team I work with is extraordinary. Yeah, I think those are the...
What about stuff that you've been seeing over the last couple of years that you haven't been working on?
On the last Bond movie, which I know some people, maybe it was polarizing for some, we had international on the movie. I didn't work on the movie because I'm the domestic guy. But I loved the evolution of Bond, and I loved how I felt like, wow, that character really grew up. Because I remember when we launched the Daniel Craig version back in the day, and, over the course of 5 movies, this character really evolved. And there was something about that. And interestingly, I sent Barbara Broccoli a note and just thanking her for how much diversity was in that movie, right? If you look at the 007 that replaces him and Moneypenny and Felix Leiter, and there was an intentional level of diversity in major roles. And I was just like, wow, this is kind of cool, right? Didn't detract from the movie for anybody. I hope not. But it certainly made me go, I'm looking in the mirror. I'm seeing, someone who looks like me in this big, giant spy movie that I'd been watching since I first started watching movies.
So speaking of which, doing this, sometimes I pinch myself because I get to hang out with some of the coolest people in the world. I got to talk to Skip in a way, and I've been studying his trailers for 20 something years, right? Bill Neal, Tommy Pitt, or people who led these agencies that I've been or Dwight Caines, or people that your colleagues now. I mean, Patrick Starr, since his HBO days, let alone his Searchlight days, or Maria, do you ever, we were talking about a couple of the Anton Fuqua movies. Do you ever pinch yourself like you're in a room and just got to kind of get a grip of yourself like, holy shit, I'm in a,
Yeah, there are those moments. They're less unbelievable now that I've been doing it for a long time.
Yeah.
But I remember like sitting in Lucy Liu's home with an artist drawing her for an animated series we were building related to the Charlie's Angels movie.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, we're sitting here chatting with Lucy Liu and trying to capture her likeness. This is bizarre. Or, I think everybody had a moment where they were happy when they met their hero. He turned out to be smart, kind, and gracious, right? So working on the Nolan movie, I think, was that moment for everybody. But yeah, I mean, I think there are things that are just so amazing about this business and the people in it, where sometimes we take a step back and we go, man, that person's talented.
Yeah.
Yeah,
at the end of the day, we're still fans, you know?
That's right.
We gotta like be cool, don't be too much of a fanboy. Like, the other show that I do, sometimes I do get people from entertainment to come on. So one of my favorite musicians, contemporary musicians, he happened to grow up 2 towns away from me, a guy named John Popper, the harmonica player from Blues Traveler. He came on the show because he wrote this autobiography that was very spiritual, very, very political. So he came on the show. But my co-host, who's a very, very accomplished journalist, he's like, hey, I have this tape of my band. Would you listen to it? I'm like, oh no, we just went fanboy on Popper. But in all honesty, we are still fans of this thing. So it's encouraging and sweet to hear that you got to pinch yourself too. If you're talking to, and you do a lot of this, we talked about it a little bit. When you're talking to students, when you're mentoring young professionals and creatives, are there certain virtues that you really exhort folks to embody that tend to lead to success?
Well, these pieces of advice they came with time, right? You can only talk about how to be successful once you experience success. So I would say mid-career, I realized that I needed to foster a personal brand that I could live up to. And so there's an exercise that I give everybody I mentor, and that is pick the 5 words or phrases that you want to be known for. And then think about what you did to live up to those each day or at some interval, right? So like for me, I want to be known as smart, kind, transparent, good in a room, and a mentor, right? Those are the things that at this point in my career I'm focused on, right? It's not necessarily about like a particular skill, again, because I'm on the back 9 of the career. So, and if you think about how you want people to see you when you say, I'm going to pick words that I can demonstrate that behavior. You can literally say, oh, was I smart in the room? Did I add value in that room? Was I kind in that room? Did I reach out and mentor or provide some kind of guidance? And I feel like that has been, in some ways, the secret to my success, right? The first thing people say when they say they've heard of me, and it used to bug the shit out of me, is they'd say, oh my God, he's the nicest guy. And I used to be like, I don't want to be the nice guy, right? I want to be the brilliant guy. But guess what? This is a business where, at least for a long period of time, a long stretch in my career, I wasn't meeting nice people, right?
Yeah.
So I don't mind being the nice guy. I don't mind that being a brand attribute that I own, right? I try to be open and accessible. It's that's what leaders are supposed to be, right? Available.
Yeah. That's an interesting exercise. I'm going to have to give that a lot of thought. I know what's important to me. I know values that I really espouse. That's all right. We can edit that out. Or maybe not. It's part of the
That's right.
when I'm recording at home, inevitably Charles Mingus III just has to chime in. My one of my dogs.
That's amazing.
So we sometimes we'll keep it in. But yeah, I would have to think about that. It would be an interesting exercise to see if I am living out what I say that I value. That would be interesting exercise. Now, we've been through a different kind of tumult over the last year or so. The industry had some major bumps in the road, and we're still experiencing the residuals of that, if you will. Where do you think things are going in the short term and maybe the medium term as an industry?
That question is I think it's something that we grapple with every day now, right? The accelerated adoption of streaming due to COVID, I think I don't know that it took us by surprise as an industry, but we weren't as prepared as we could have been. And so technology adoption, I said earlier in this conversation that as a digital executive coming up, I filled the gap. I filled the need. I can solve a problem for a company. I'm going to be your subject matter expert in digital, and therefore, stand out of my way. Let me do my thing. I think AI is that next thing where it's moving fast. It's quite terrifying. If it is a tool, it could be really exciting, right? Create efficiencies. Like think about, we launch a trailer and then we've got to dub it and sub it, create multiple versions, resize it, get it out in X number of territories, put it up on a number of different platforms, and all of that work takes time. And one of the reasons why you see a content launch where it's cascading over time is, we can only do the OV markets, the English speaking markets, or these markets. We couldn't get to these because we need to dub. We got to hire the guy who does the voice of this actor in this territory. Well, I think AI with the proper permission from talent can enable quicker to market on simple things, right? Maybe the dubbing, the subbing, the reformatting, that kind of stuff. And so I think that's a place to watch. If you look at sometimes technology, kind of emerges and it looks like it's going to be something like NFTs, right? Or Bitcoin or those things, right? But AI, I think, is moving at a rate that's extraordinary. It's exciting and kind of terrifying at the same time. And if we make sure there's always a human pilot, I think we can use it to great advantage.
That's interesting. I mean, there's just little ways. Literally yesterday, I was publishing an episode for one of our shows, and one of the places that we publish or that we announce is on LinkedIn. So I'm writing the post, I'm writing the post on LinkedIn, and then there's this prompt. I forget the name of it, but it's like, hey, do you want us to rewrite this post for you? So I'm gonna try using that. But what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use most of their language, but I do have to curate, right? So I'm gonna experiment with that because I feel like I know that it's coming, but I feel like it kind of like I talked about with Dawn Bailey when she started her career. She reminded me her first big poster that she finished was the original Footloose, but when they started BLT, it was the advent of Photoshop. It was Cork back then, Cork and Illustrator on the Mac, so it could have been terrifying, and people who were just used to using the razors and the cutting and the pasting and but they just embraced it as a tool, like you said.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. One thing I wanted to make sure to ask you about, I mentioned this in the intro that you're very involved in charitable endeavors. Stand Up to Cancer.
Yeah, look, I remember, I think I mentioned Spider-Man as one of my favorite campaigns, and that's where I met Laura Ziskin, who was a producer on Spider-Man, Sam Raimi's Spider-Man with Tobey Maguire. And Laura got diagnosed with metastatic breast cancer, and she came to me in 2008 and said she was co-founder of this organization, and the organization was designed to assemble teams of scientists who, instead of working at counter purposes to one another, would get together to try to find cures or make progress with funds that helped them all, right? And that the big initiatives were going to be fundraising to enable this scientific research through a network telecast, a roadblock telecast on all the major networks. And then she needed a campaign. She needed a digital campaign. And so I joined the board of EIF, the Entertainment Industry Foundation, and then became sort of the digital consultant on Stand Up to Cancer. And one of our things was, if you think about micro donations, over the course of your day, if you're a coffee drinker, how many times you pull into Coffee Bean or Starbucks or wherever you get your coffee, and what does that cost you? $5, at least. And so we started a campaign to say, what would you give up today to fight cancer? Would you give up your cup of coffee? Would you give up, at the time when we launched the campaign, a song on iTunes was 99 cents, right? So we said, would you give up the cost of a song, right? And so we tried to make an analogy between the little creature comforts that we enjoy each day and say, give up one of those today and give the money to these scientists. And so Stand Up, I think, has done, I want to say 6 or 8 telecasts since 2008. Has generated hundreds of millions of dollars in cancer research. I lost an aunt when I was in high school to cancer, which was one of the things that really resonated with me. It's one of the reasons why I said yes immediately. It was probably the beginning for me of joining sort of organized social good efforts, if that makes sense.
Yeah. We'll get to some links and stuff like that in a second. Couple more questions before we land the plane. One is, do you have any questions for me?
Yeah, I do.
Oh, shit. Okay.
So you've been doing this for a while.
Yeah.
What success look like for you in this podcast space, right? When you say, man, it worked, what does that look like for you emotionally or impact-wise?
So this particular podcast or
just
my endeavors?
I think your endeavors.
Oh, boy, nobody's asked me that question before. So when I was a young man, I felt that my soul was dying a slow death on Wall Street. And that's why I went up to Chelsea and Greenwich Village and was doing theater up there. One of the big reasons is because every night, even though there was literally like 25 people in the audience, if we were doing Chekhov justice, if we were breathing new life into Three Sisters or Cherry Orchard or Shakespeare or Odette's or O'Neill, we were doing something, man. And what it was I wanted to engage the culture, even if it was just 1 person, 25 people, 1,000 people, 10,000 people. I just wanted to engage the culture in meaningful conversations. At that time, it was through the breathing new life into the words of Shakespeare or Tennessee Williams. But now it's through these intimate, candid, personal conversations through this incredible medium, and I've experienced some of that, having some of the people that I've admired from afar. Obviously, I talked about in this, on this program, some people that I'm dear friends with, but also, a couple of the other programs I'm involved with. There's this lady, that I got to know. I read about her in a book. Her name's Lisa Sharon Harper, and she has this organization called Freedom Road. And I reached out to Lisa initially to be on my politics and religion show. She was working for Jim Wallace for a while, and now she has her own organization. She wrote this book in 2022, came out in January 2022, called Fortune: How Race Broke My Family and the World and How to Repair It All. Um, and she came on the program, and through doing research to prepare for my interview with her, I found out that part of her Freedom Road was this podcast. And after we stopped recording, I was like, hey, Lisa, I love all your work, and I'm a now podcast geek. My only complaint is I want more. And she goes, yeah, me too. And then she's like, and you're just the man to help me do it. So now this lady that I read about in a book, and then I read her book and learned about her story and had her interviewed her on my program. And then, just as well. And now I've been producing her show. You don't hear me on because I'm the guy behind the glass on that one. But now I get to work with this incredible leader,
That is amazing.
So that's what, and listen, man, I ain't getting rich doing it, but in a way I am, Like, who would have thought that I could now consider someone like Lisa a dear friend of mine, or having a conversation with David Brooks, somebody whose work I've been reading and identifying with for 15 years, 20 years, and he came on the program and we had such a heart to heart, that's what it looks like.
Yeah. That's great. I love that full circle moment, right? That somebody that you admired is now somebody that you have this connection with, like on a personal level.
Yeah. I just talked to Francis S. Collins 2 days ago, the guy who headed up the Human Genome Project.
Wow.
And he headed up NIH, the National Institutes of Health. We talked for like 2 hours, and you would think I'd talk to him about science and human genome. We talked about music for like a half hour before we ever touched upon, the other stuff. So that's cool, man. Thank you for asking that. It's got me thinking, okay, what does that look like? So
I should have asked you what your 5 words are.
I got to think about that.
That describe your personal brand.
Well, I want to say, my father and grandfather, are men. They call them Eshes Chai in Yiddish, like men of valor, men of integrity. If I can, to me, that's what greatness looks like. My Zeta, my grandfather, he wasn't famous. He ran a grocery store until he had a heart attack and couldn't run it anymore. And then he was an insurance salesman, for the last 10, 15 years of his working life. Just a man of integrity. So that's one word, integrity, heart, loyalty, giving. I mean, those are some of the words that I would want to be known for. So, is there anything that we've covered a lot of ground here? Is there anything important that you want to add here that we haven't covered yet?
A couple of things. One is, my own full circle career moment. I remember early research days, and Christine's role changed, and I had to solo on some campaigns. And I remember Antoine Fuqua, his first feature was a movie called The Replacement Killers with Chow Yun-fat and Mira Sorvino. And I remember being the research exec, talking him through the screening process and the ad testing process. And I was learning the job as this young director was coming up, right? And so I'm trying to not show him that I'm new here, So but it was a really cool moment. And then as I was leaving Sony, and Antoine was the director of The Equalizer. And the first Equalizer was one of the last campaigns that I was a part of. And again, kind of ending out my time there, having done everything I actually wanted to do, and then having that same director, that was just kind of a cool moment. That was really, really resonated with me. The other thing that I want to touch on is, when I got recruited by our chairman, Donna Langley, to co-chair this inclusion effort at Universal, one of the things she said was, hey, I think our company does a good job in this space, but we need to amplify that. We need to let people know what we're doing. It's happening all around us. What do we do? And so I tapped into that digital marketer experience of mine, and we launched something called Make It Universal. That's the handle, at Make It Universal. We launched that on Instagram. We launched it on X. We have a YouTube playlist. We're going to be moving to TikTok and some other platforms. And that is really a platform. It's a startup, to be sure, but it's a place where we celebrate our workforce, our creative community, and the partners we serve. And the difference between another DEI platform is we try not to use DEI language. It's really about telling stories from a people-first perspective. Let's meet people who are diverse in the broadest sense of the word, right? So we'll be featuring some Paralympians because NBC Universal has the Olympics, right? We feature diverse below-the-line talent on all of our movies that get released. We embrace the person who is the strategist in the digital distribution team, and we're doing things that really just take the everyday employee in a job you may not know existed and trying to give them their flowers. And again, it's leaning into a culture that I think Donna has fostered where you can show up authentically, you can contribute, and, we expect you to, and that adds value to the conversation and hopefully to the work. So that was just something that I've been really proud of that work, and we're going to continue this year. We're going to launch a podcast with Jacqueline Coley from Rotten Tomatoes, and she's going to chat with some of our employees about their personal connection with film.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. I'm glad you mentioned Make It Universal. I did want to ask you before we close, you mentioned Stand Up Cancer, Make It Universal. How can folks find you, the important initiatives that you're involved with, and all the great work that you're doing?
You can find me on LinkedIn for sure. My team jokes I'm a LinkedIn influencer. You can find me on Instagram, but I'm pretty discerning about, I have to approve all of the followers, right? Because I've gotten some strange follower requests, and so I don't have a huge following on there. You can find me on X, Dwight Caines, at Dwight Caines. Yeah, those are the places that I'm at. standuptocancer.org.
Okay.
If anybody is wanting to look at the great work that they're continuing to do.
We'll make sure to put all these links in the show notes as well.
Right on.
This was awesome, Dwight. I really enjoyed this.
Yeah. Hopefully I didn't stink up the joint, and maybe you'll have me back in the future.
I would love to. This would be great. Or we could just, grab lunch and, whatever. On me, I really, you've been somebody whose work I've admired, who I've always heard such great things about. So this is just a real treat for me just to get. This is why I do it, by the way. It's like my sneaky way of being able to sit down with people
Look, this is great fun. I'm an introvert who masquerades occasionally as an extrovert, but some of the things that are really near and dear to my heart are the things that I find it really easy to talk about. You know, so thank you for having me and for your persistence.
We have been trying to do this for quite some time.
Yes.
Back in, I think 2019 is when we first started talking about it. So I'm so glad this came together. And as always, make sure here's the thing. Go to the Trailer Geeks thing, especially on Apple Podcasts, and write us a review. It really does help us get discovered so more folks can learn about people like Dwight's career and be inspired by that. It helps us get discovered on the app there as well as other apps. So go to Apple Podcast. Make sure you write us a review on there. I'm easy to find, Corey S. Nathan. That's Corey, Corey, S as in Sam, Nathan. And check out our awesome sponsor, De Facto Sound, at defactosound.com. Really grateful to all those folks for helping us keep the lights on. And thank you for joining us and listening to these great conversations. Now go do some inspired work.